else.
Recording in progress.
Okay, welcome everyone to this class on Parshas Vayishlach, and this is a Rashi Sicher. The first pasuk in the Parsha Vayishlach, Yaacov Melachim. Rashi has his famous comment, and it says on this on the section of Vayishlach Yaacov Melachim, Mefarish Rashi says Melachim mamish, that it was actual Melachim. That's how we translate it. Melachim mamish, the actual Melachim. Now, our question and our motivating question for the day is, how does Rashi know this? So let's continue. Rashi tzarich lefarish kan Melachim mamish. Rashi is required to explain it that these are Melachim mamish, kiven, because the understanding of the verse in the expression in our verse, Yesh bo v'yishlach Yaakov Melachim, actually could be understood in two sorts of ways. Base Pirushim, and those two Pirushim originate in the Midrash, in Parshas Rabbah and Perek 75. The Midrash says over there, Pirush Echad, one explanation, one Pirush on Melachim is that it's Pirush Shluchim, that this is simply messengers. Hainu, that is to say, that they would have been actual human beings, flesh and blood, shluchim, messengers. So therefore, we could translate Vayishlach Yaakov Melachim, that Yaakov sent messengers to Esau. And why would we think along those ways? Because that's standard. If you're sending messengers, he had people who are working for him. We've learned previously that Yaakov was a wealthy man. He had servants and maidservants, animals and cattle. He had people that were tendering them, as we speak about a little bit later on in the verses later, right? That he had those ones. So it's reasonable to assume that he actually sent physical human beings as messengers. However, the Midrash brings a second pirush. The Midrash says Melachim mamish, that it was actual angels. And Rashi chooses out of the two options that he has, the two options that the Midrash gives him, he chooses Rashi Mefarish Melachim mamish. He chooses Melachim, and in fact, V'shelu, and he rejects as a Pirush Rishon, Mahamedrash, and he rejects the first Pirush of the Medrash. We can postulate that the Medrash brings us the first understanding as human beings, because that's regular. That's what to be expected. He had many servants. He had many. Okay. So the Midrash gave me two options. The options that was selected by Rashi was the one of a Melachim, and the Rashi has rejected, seemingly, the one that is physical human beings. Now, it would seem obvious, it would seem apparent, it would seem more likely that Rashi should pick the more simple pshat, the more logical, the more apparent pshat. So, both Pirushim are true, because we say B'elu Dibra Elokim Kayim, because so intuitively you would think that Rashi would pick that it was human beings.
Right.
But however, Rashi has written Melachim and Melachim Mamish. And that is the expression that's in the Midrash. But Rashi, sometimes when he wants to pshatim, or when he wants to add in something which is more advanced, right, he'll bring a simple one and then say an advanced one of a Midrash.
Right.
But that's not what Rashi does this time. Rashi's only got Melachim Mamish. So even though both are true, both of these interpretations are the simple interpretation of Melachim. Melachim can mean literally angels, and it can mean messengers. So in the literal sense, Rashi has selected one which is literally correct. Nevertheless, he's actually picked the one of Melachim, Kivon, because Rashi's motivation always is the Mafarish Pshuta Shel Mikra, to explain the simple understanding of the verse, and Pshuta Shel Mikra, Behemshach Shel Sipur, and the continuation of the story. It appears it appears that the flow demands that he pick the idea of Melachim, as will be explained and elucidated further. And even though there is some sort of pervasive idea why he might pick Melachim, real angels, but nevertheless, by picking that as Melachim, it's real angels, it's not in contradiction to the idea that they're also messengers. So it appears that by picking the idea that they are angels, that this seems to be some sort of motivation via the verse itself, but as we are going to further elucidate, but it appears that from Rashi's modus operandi that he has to pick the Pshuta Shel Mikra for the reasons that we're going to investigate as we move along. It seems that Melachim Mamish seems a better fit, although it seems strange. It's not intuitively obvious. And even though Midrash is a chelik of the Torah, because chelik of Torah yesh leklolim shalei, and every type of explanation has their sets of rules why that in particular interpretation, that particular style of interpretation, whether it be Pshuta Shel Mikra, the simple understanding, or whether it be a Midrash, agodic explanation, follows its own sort of internal consistent type of rules. Right? It appears that Rashi must have some sort of definitive reasons why he's chosen this explanation over that explanation and hasn't brought the other one. And that has to fit Pshuta Shel Mikra, and it has to fit the simple understanding of the verse. So therefore he has to fit with the simple understanding. And that's the simple understanding of Midrash doesn't always allow a Midrashic comment to come in. And for instance, and for instance, as a rule that we say that we can't learn a halacha from an agadic story, even though they both are from Torah, but we won't derive a halacha from an agada. Because each one of those two types of teachings have got their own framework which they need to exist in, and it doesn't necessarily, and there's no requirement that the framework of Haggadah and the framework of Halacha have to synchronize together. And by saying this, we're not implying in any way whatsoever that one is not truer than the other. Because every part of Torah and everything that people will understand and derive from the Torah are all true. Because they all derive from Moshe and Sinai. They all come from Moshe, as was given to Moshe on Har Sinai. And this is understood. That Hashem, the true God, gave us the truth. In fact, the Rambam requires that and says that this is one of the main ideas in the faith in the Torah. If a person says even one word of the Torah is not true, which includes any of the stories within halacha, they must be true. And if a person says that even though that this story or this aspect of Torah might be true, but it doesn't come from Moshe, the Rambam declares him a kafir, an apostate. And not only that word, and if a person denies anything that's in the Torah, then he is called a denier of its explanation as well as the oral Torah. Nevertheless, but every part of Torah has its own interpretation and its own framework. So even in halacha itself, because there are parts of one halacha that we can't infer to another part of halacha, or another part within halacha itself, whether a person has a chiddush, we don't necessarily learn a halacha from that. But because each part of Torah has its own sets of framework and derivative capabilities. So let's going back to our pasuk. So there are some commentators who say about our particular verse that we're talking about. That Rashi is motivated and even more is required to take the interpretation that the Midrash says as Melachim mamish. Why? Because the pasuk says, what's the next word in the verse? Vayishlach Yaacov Melachim lefonov. That Yaacov took the messages from before him. So what does that part of the verse mean? Before him. V'heim lemdim, and those commentators say shalafonov, that the ones in front of him or the ones before him actually refers to ma'asin aksuvim lifnei ashlichas. It refers to the lefonov in front of him or next to him or before him, as the idea is the verses which came before this. Right, and so therefore, which are the verses which came before this? Because at the end of the previous Parsha, we hear that as Yaakov is traveling from Haran to Eretz Yisrael, he hasn't made it to Eretz Yisrael yet, but he meets these angels, and he calls this place Machanayim because he's got the two groups of angels. So when we talk about Lefonov, what's in front of him, what are we referring to? The messengers that he has in front of him. And what messengers are that? They're the Melachim. And that seems to fit in nicely to what we are saying. That why does Rashi have to say it's actually real angels? Because it refers to the verses beforehand, what he has in front of him, what he has next to him, what does he have next to him? He has those Melachim which are guarding him and which travel to meet him from Eretz Yisrael, and the ones which are accompanying him from Chutz La'aretz. So he's got two camps of Melachim, and if he took of those. But the Rebbe continues, but because everything is deriven from the word Lefonov, this idea is driven, that is to say, the hechrach we are motivated to say that this is because these are the Melachim, because they are Lefonov. In that case, Rashi's got a bunch of rules that he abides to. And Rashi so therefore, in the subtitle of the Rashi, which the commentary comes on, if it was important to know, he always puts it in the subtitle. But we find that in the subtitle, Tevas Lefonov, this word Lefonov is not there. But what the subtitle of the heading of Rashi is, the first three words, but not the fourth word. And since we're saying we're motivated by the fourth word, Lefonov, and it's important, and this is really the crux of why he picked that the second Pirush in the Midrash, it would have to be in the subtitle. And that is Kedarka Shel Rashi, and that is the style of Rashi. He brings in the subtitle the words which force his explanation. But not the ones that he's just going to explain. So in that case, because it's not there, we can't say that this is what's driving Rashi to say that it's Melachim Mamish. So we're back to our original question.
Back to square one.
What is the motivation for Rashi to pick that second Pirush and not the intuitive interpretation of the workers, of the servants that he had with him? There are other Mefarshim. This Mizrahi, V'yesh Mefarshim sheRashi Mukhrach Lefarsh Melachim Mamish, that he's forced to say that it's Melachim Mamish. Why? Kiman Shah Posuk Vayishlach V'Gema Bo Behemshach L'Psuchim Akedim B'Seif Peshes V'Yetzer, that since it's just a running verse, right? So, as we've discussed previously, the Torah is just a running verses, right? So it has to has to continue from those previous verses. And that we saw all those angels, Parshas Rashi, so Rashi, all Rashi is saying is from those ones particularly, Melachim. Instead of having to say that we're forced to say Lefonov, that's driving, let's just say that it comes from the word Melachim, right? And Melachim, well, I've got Melachim next to me, right? So it's the same idea, right? That it's from the Melachim, right? But the ones that I've got next to me, and those are the Melachim, because the verse says Vayishlach Yaacov Melachim. So what Melachim? The ones at hand. So Parshas Rashi Ma'isa Melachim Shalach Yaakov Le'Esav. Now, that's a potential explanation. Abel Pirush say Eina Mechaber, but I've got a problem with that, with that Pirush. Ein Zeh Masim Al Pi Halacha. This doesn't fit with halacha. Why not? Lagabe Azov, we know that there are some specific halachas which relate to other other areas, and we know that our forefathers kept the halachas, or they did things in consonant with them. So when it comes to the halachas of sprinkling the Metzera and also the Paradoma, you need to take what we translate in English as the hyssop, right? The hyssop plant, and utilize that as part of the sprinkling process. There's a halacha, right? That there is halacha that if there is shesorach min shenikra esav stam, that when there is in that particular case you have to use the hyssop stam, the ordinary hyssop, right? But you're not allowed to use. But if there is an object which has got a borrowed name or an added name that defines what it is, right? For instance, as of Yovan, for instance, there's a Greek type of hyssop, or there's another version, right? There's a particular beans that are called, Egyptian beans, right? Whatever, right? And in that case, we're required to. The Torah tells us, the Torah Nema as of Stam, Leishem Levai, the Torah tells us which ones to use. So therefore, if there is this specific sort that I should be using, they're named. Now, we look back to the verses previous, and we hear about the Melachim, we see they've actually got a term. They're actually called something. At the end of Parshas Vayishlach, they're not called Melachim. They're called Melachim Elakim. Therefore, ain't a Melachim stam shel Parshas Vayishlach. So they can't be these Melachim of the ones which are in our parsha, because those ones have got a name. And if there's if they're required to be defined as who they are, the Torah would use that name, that category of them, as it did in the previous verses. So it can't be necessarily from those ones. And if this does come as a continuation of the previous verses, it should have said Vayishlach Yaacov Hamalachim. The real correct way would have been to say, well, which Malachim I'm using? I'm using those specific ones, Hamalachim, those ones that we know about. When do we use the expression Hamalachim, right? That tells us these are the specific ones. Which ones are the ones we talked about last week? Those ones over there. They're known to us. Those ones hanging around with us, right? Hamalachim. Or I would say, Meha Malachim, from those Malachim, if not all of them, Bahaya Yudua, with the definitive article, those ones. But since our verse over here doesn't say that, this isn't something different. This is something special. This is not the ones of those ones which have been mentioned previously, right? And therefore, therefore it's not a continuation of the ones which are before. And we find that there is the Balaturim gives a pirush on the previous verses and says that Machanayim is a Rosh Tevas for the word Ma'isam Chayolim, from those parts of the hosts, Notel, Yaakov, Malachim. Yaakov took these angels. Each part of Torah has its own rules, and that rules that the Balaturim is using, Binyan and Nechkin is using a drush that based on like Gamat on the Rosh Tevas. Chelik Remes B'Torah, which is a portion of Remes B'Torah, but Lo Medakim B'Zeh. So therefore, you can't be specific about Ein Lakshus the Shalas and you can't ask specific questions on it because it's got its own framework and format. Shekan Nema Malachim, and over here it says Malachim. Well, even before it says Malachim Malachim, but we're talking about Pshuta Shel Mikra, so they're from Pshuta Shel Mikra Halachah. You have to have you have to lock into these specific framework of using those references. Shekan Havleil Malachim B'Hei Yodua. So these questions that we've put together, they're potentially not questions because they don't necessarily have the right framework. But Rashi has to say Mafarish Pshuta Shel Mikra. He has to give us something which has to accord to the simple understanding of the verse. And so that we come back to our original question. Why has he picked this as opposed to that, right? And it doesn't necessarily seem to fit. And why is Rashi considering this, what he says, Malachim Mamish, as the simple understanding that's in the Torah? Okay. So Yeshna Huchrach Neisel B'Pirush Rashi She Yaakov Sholach Malachim Mamish. There's another idea that the Rebbe wants to present why that we could say this Malachim Mamish. There is a din that Misha Sholach Shliach when there is a so when there is a shluch is sent, Misha shluch v'shlich nizak b'eish shlichosei, we've got a rule in halacha, which is another idea, which is another framework, but we've got a rule. Misha shluch says someone who sends a shliach, v'shlich nizak b'eish shlichosei, and he gets hurt while doing the job of his shlichus, the one who sent him has to do something in compensation to, and really has to do tshuva for that he put a person in a state of danger. Al Yaakov, like I'll say, just teach on Yaakov, that when it came to his mind that he's sending Yosef to visit his brothers in the next parshas, and he's putting him in danger because he knew that there was an unhappiness between them, right? He says that he was troubled. His stomach, he felt not good in his stomach, is the expression. You know, he knew that he had done potentially something wrong. So we could think that maybe what's motivating Rashi to pick the second pirush, remembering that the second pirush of Melachim Mamish fits the simple translation, or might not be intuitively obvious, but it fits the translation of both things, that it's a real Melachim, real angels, as well as real messengers. However, we've got so this potential idea that we're going to suggest now, is that perhaps Rashi is saying that Yaakov had no choice but to send real Melachim. Why? Who is he sending Melachim to? Who is he sending messages to? He's sending messages to Esau, and he potentially, Yaakov, as we know, is somewhat worried about Esau, right? To say it, not as strongly, right? And so if he would send real shluchim, that is human beings, bosser Adam, humans of flesh and blood, they potentially could be in danger. The Kiman Shoya Esle Sophic, and since by Yaakov, at least there was a doubt. Ma Nasa im Esau, what's Esau's attitude towards him at the moment? I mean, it's 20 years hence since he left, so perhaps he's cooled down, perhaps he hasn't. And he thinks perhaps if messages would go to them, potentially I can get them in danger. And the halacha says I can't put my messengers in danger. I have to do tshuva because of it. And it's even possible that there might be a malchama with them, which he actually finds out when the shluchim come back, because the shluchim come back and they tell him, what's coming, that Esau's coming to greet you with 400 armed men, right? So they potentially would have been in large danger. Therefore, he really did have a stopping. He really did have a doubt that he was being putting these people into danger, and he really shouldn't be doing that. That he is actually now sending messengers into a mokum sakana in a dangerous circumstance. But now, and how much more so in a case of pekuach nefesh, that even in a case where we want to save someone else, we're always worried about the potential for danger, or even a doubt of a doubt when it comes to a danger, sveka, about that. And therefore we should really consider a second time and a third time. Esau had a chazaka. We have a very strong feeling towards Bezer Shalifnese from beforehand that something negative could happen to the shluchim. Rashi, like Rashi like Rashi says before, when at the time when the birthright was sold, Behu Oyev, that he was, that the verse tells us that Esau comes in and he was weak, he was tired, the expression says, right? He and Rashi comments, the comment to that point is, why was he tired? Because he'd just been through some very strenuous things. He had been murdered people. And later he says, he wants to kill. He was, the verse tells us, the Ruach HaKodesh tells us, the verse tells us via the prophecy that he wants to kill his brother. So for sure he had a stopping, he had a doubt. And even though 20 years later he's only coming back, so even though now he's been informed 20 years later that it's a good time to come back, the messenger that was sent to him from his mother was that it's time that you can, that now it's time you can come back, right? And therefore he shouldn't fear Esau. Harry ben Egelis, but didn't we just say that the halakha is in relationship to risking your life, but in particular taking the responsibility for other people? You can't necessarily rely on the testimony of his mother, of both of their mothers, that it's okay to come back. Afilu shel tzaddik, and even if it is a tzaddik, Nema, it says al tamim be'ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu miyakid shmei shel tzaddikim b'chayekim v'alach kam be'esav she'esa lo chazak ha'oftis mekaydim l'kein. So how much more so in the case of Esau, where he's got a chazaka that he could kill him. But and in particular, Yaakov has got a simple choice: send real people, or send the Melachim that he has next to him. So Rashi is suggesting to us that that potentially we could say that the reason why Rashi picks of the two Perushim, human beings or Melachim, is because he wants to take the lighter of the two potentials. If he sends real people, there's the potential for sakona, for them having some sort of damage. If he sends malachim, if he sends angels, well, they won't be endangered by Esau. So l'shlech meraglim b'asavdam. So he could send those two. Meraglim b'Yaakov b'kasha osa eina yoda shem anshe Yaakov. But when when they came, they didn't necessarily know that when the Melachim came, he didn't necessarily know that they were part of the forces of Yaakov. And potentially not to be harmed. So Aval Yaakov shalach Melachim shluchim, but when Yaakov sent angels shluchim b'yetzim, and when they left from him, loba le'esav dafka b'tur shluchei Yaakov, they came as. Also, on the one hand, if he would send people who are just checking out the scene, right? So potentially Esau might not harm them. But if you send people to check out what Esau's doing and what's he like and what's his attitude, that was their shlichus, right? And from the idea of shluchas shel adam kamesa, that a shlich is like the person. Nishailas miyad shaila. So a simple reading of the verse would say, right? Kate said, "Hey, Yaakov, I said so. How could Yaakov actually take upon himself to send real people? If he sends real people, then they will potentially be harmed. And I've got two choices, right? So therefore, you have to be scared that Esau will do them damage. So therefore, we can say that Rashi decided Lafarish Shahem to explain Malachim Mamish that are actually Malachim. Okay, so that sounds like we've come to a reasonable explanation of why they are why Rashi has chosen Melachim within the framework of Pshuta Shel Mikra, within the with the understanding of the simple understanding of the verse that these are Melachim. We've spoken about Melachim, and that we know that that Yaakov had Melachim at his disposal, even besides the ones which were in the camp which were traveling with him. So the Chera al Bizeh Ein Amurim. So in that case, let's think about this. This is Yaakov. Yaakov has sent ordinary, Melachim to his brother Esav. But if we say that that Yaakov is worried about the potential of that some damage will happen to the actual physical human beings, and that's why he preferred to send Melachim, we have an incident that happens in the next parsha where he's actually puts a person into danger, his own son. Let's read. How could then Yaakov send his own son in a place of sakona? And we can answer Yaakov klal sakona. We could answer that Yaakov never really suspected, as we find from the verse itself in that parsha, that he's putting his own son into a mokum sakona. He felt a little bit queasy about the idea, but he didn't think that a sakona would happen. Why? Because the verses told us that all the 11 shvatim were all tzaddikim, mitzvah shlema. They were all complete. V'hein Yosef, v'hein shar shvatim. That Yosef and all the other shvatim, hein tzaddikim gemurim, were total tzaddikim. But like Allah klal al daitan, it didn't occur to him at all. Lichshot, to even suspect as the shvatim, the brothers, that they would do such a negative thing. Or he didn't suspect that Yosef was bad, was saying bad things. That he told bad things about his brothers, that they would consider that this to be a punishment, that they would make a bezdin and then try to kill him over it. This interpretation that we've offered, this also is a explanation on a general question. How is it possible that even Yaakov could send Esav real Melachim? Who said that he's allowed to use and utilize real angels? Who says that he could use angels that, even though it might be not exactly the same angels that we called before in the previous verses as Melachim Elakim, godly angels, still the verse is telling us that he sent angels, and that's what Rashi's Purush, that Rashi is saying. Or that's the Midrash is saying. So what gives Yaakov the right to be able to use Melachim for these purposes, to check out Esav? Mefarshim Mabur, and some Mefarshim answer, that in fact, that Yaakov was using the Melachim had another reason as well. And why is that? As is explained, that he wanted to put a fear in the heart of Esav that Yaakov has Melachim. Abaladas Rashi, but and that's one pirush, but according to Rashi, the binyan maskinan, and that's the topic that we're going. We're working in the framework of Pshuta Shel Mikra, even though there does exist that explanation, right? We're working with Rashi's style. Ein ze movement, it's not understood. Al apostle ki al kain reisi panech kereis pnei elakim. When Yaakov sends and says to the messengers, to the second set of messengers, that he says to them that they should say, they should pass on as part of their messages. When I see your face, there's like the Pnei Elakim of Rashi. Rashi explains Hiskaloi Riya Samalach, that he says, he mentions there that by seeing you, it's like I'm seeing God, I'm seeing the holy angels. So he's mentioning, Rashi's already mentioned, so Yaakov himself is already mentioning that I can see Malach. And the reason why he did that was that Esav should be scared of him. And if you want to say that Yaakov originally sent the first set of Melachim, the first set of angels to Esav, then why does he need to say this in the second passage? He's already sent real Melachim to him. Why does he have to say the same thing and tell him the same thing a second time? He'd already sent the first set of Melachim, which were Melachim, and therefore he showed that he has the power of Melachim. So therefore, the Melachim which Yaakov had sent him, they, in actual fact, were Melachim, angels, but dressed as but in the image as human beings. They weren't like human beings. They indicate Nishra Shiloh. So we can even ask, so for sure, okay, so they didn't send them in the image of holy angels. They were sent as like human beings. I looked on him, but nevertheless, what gave Yaakov permission to use holy angels in such a manner? Our Pihanal movement, but nevertheless, we can understand the answer by using the answer that we've already given till now, by having real Melachim who are not human beings, but have the image of human beings. If Esav does something evil to them, right, they won't be impaired. They're not physical human beings. Because Yaakov doesn't want to send and is not capable of sending them to a place of Shechona. So therefore, you have to send real Melachim in the images of human beings and send him. And this way, when we answer our pshat this way, we have a clear understanding of the verse, and the verse can fit in as its literal in a literal translation. I don't have to say that the messengers are not, we don't have to say messengers are some sort of other messengers. They are, that they are shluchim. No, in fact, they are Melachim, and we keep to the literal text. Right. So in this way, Pshut Shul Mikra of Rashi fits in. Our question now says, what is the teaching that we learn from this? What can we understand from all this? So I'm going to section above. So this idea the person has to learn out. This can teach us that when a person has to involve himself with some new aspect, some physical new aspect, I feel a rock, even if it is something physical, when a person has to be involved himself in something which is new, and even though it might be a status change for him, but nevertheless, this is the idea of going to a place, going to a new area from a place where he's already involved. He has to say to himself, and he has to learn from this, that before you go to Esav, you have to send him. You have to send to him l'sheich l'sham as keich haseichel v'keich hahergesh. A person has to send his thoughts. He has to send his feelings to understand what will happen there. Just like Yaakov sent Melachim to investigate what will be and what's going to come out of things, and to sense whether the circumstances are ripe for for him returning, right? A person has to also do themselves, has to understand for themselves that even if it is a time of a transition, going from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, that is going from a place of outside Israel, not literally, but outside the place of doing mitzvahs, to a place of more mitzvahs being the idea of the land of Israel. A person should investigate if this is a circumstance whether he doesn't have to fight for it. A person has to investigate and has to understand that in things of kedusha, a person has to evaluate and has to send not all of himself, shouldn't invest all of himself in it, but first investigate, but send only his outer malachim, his outer garbs, his outer capabilities, right, to investigate whether this is the right move for him, and whether this is the right aspect for him. Yaakov was from the forefathers, from the Merkava, and the Avos themselves, and Yaakov was the Bochesh of Avos, the most chosen of them. And even though he got himself involved in the area of Lavan, and he survived Lavan, he survived all the trepidations that he had with Lavan Aromi, with his uncle, and he's coming to this new place. But on his return to Esau, he sends out Melachim to investigate what should happen to him, and to investigate Esau, and to investigate the land that he's going to. And after understanding the depth of it, he can understand that, and he can think that even though he is my brother, nevertheless he might be still tracking like Esau the Russia. Therefore, Yaakov had to meditate and to then ameliorate, and then had to be flexible enough to change his approach. When he initially sent out the Melachim, angels, to see how he would, because his approach was that he thought, sure, I'm going to my brother, and he's going to accept me, my brother. But then he finds out that he, in fact, is coming with 400 men. Therefore, he's still Russia. He's still the Russia, right? Who hates me. So therefore, he had to change tack, and he had to be resilient and flexible enough to then adopt a new strategy of to send presents, to pray to Hashem and prepare himself for Milchama. And he had to organize a new Seder of Aveda. That is to say, he had to put himself into a new level after he had sent the Melachim. And these Melachim that he sent, right, even though he sent these Melachim, he sent them as Melachim which were dressed in the garb of human beings. Meaning to say that even though you do an investigation and you try to find out what the next circumstances are that you're going to, right, you can't invest yourself totally to the point where your whole neshama goes in, because the neshama itself still belongs to Yaakov, still belongs to yourself in the highest realm. Even if you're going to a new level, a new job, a new position, right? You only should invest the malachim, the outside garbs of things, but not the entire everything of yourself, right? And not your nefesh elokis as well, right? Because this is a new realm that you're going into. So we have explained this Rashi, and I think that this is a very nice understanding in Rashi. So with this explanation, Rashi has kept to, like we've said in the middle of the Sikha, we've kept to the literal meaning of the word Melachim, but also has explained the idea of not putting people in sakona, and why it had to be a Melachim, as because there won't be any damage, but it also has to be Melachim in the image of human beings. So I hope we all enjoyed this shir, and we'll see you next time.